Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This highly practical podcast series explores HR and management hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Brought to you by Actus software, our aim is to build a better workplace for people. The HR Uprising is about collaborating and supporting each other to build the confidence and skills to rise up to each challenge and deliver real, lasting business value. You can find out more at hruprising.com or join our LinkedIn community. Now introducing your host, chartered psychologist, best-selling author, entrepreneur and speaker, Lucinda.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising episode. And this week I've got, well, it's interesting. This isn't an HR professional with me, but I believe that what Rob has to say is really, really relevant to us as an industry and as individuals. So I've got Rob Kerr with me today, and Rob is actually the author of a book that's coming out in January called Project Future. And he is a project manager by background, but the reason I felt that this was a worthwhile podcast for us to explore was when I was invited to review his book, I realized that it had a huge number of really practical models which could be applied to you whether you are within your career and wanting to make decisions, or if you are actually looking to make a change in career. And that's one of the things that we'll find out later from Rob as to what he does. But he's basically come up with a methodology which is really useful for decision making and can be applied to us in terms of decisions that we might make with regard to our specialities, our careers. If we want to set up a business, it's quite applicable to people who are internal of HR, and also if you're an independent HR or thinking of being independent HR. So, Rob, it's really great to have you with us today on the HR Uprising. I'll let you give a little bit more background because in terms of where you come from and how we can apply this to this audience. But just one of the main things that we both felt quite passionately about is that we recognise that sometimes people are lacking confidence, maybe lacking confidence in themselves. I saw on a recent poll on one of the social media networks that the top thing that HR professionals are saying that they felt was holding them back was a lack of confidence. And from the book that I read that you've written, I felt that if you have the right decisions, if you followed a process, then you can have more confidence. And I think that's one of the outcomes we were hoping to get out of this, is that to share some processes that you can do when thinking about your career, thinking about where you are, and ideally that's going to give us more confidence because we know we've thought it through effectively. So Absolutely. Welcome, Rob. Do you want to give us a little bit of background? I know I've kind of gone into the content to position it there, but tell us a bit about yourself first.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I'm delighted to be on the show. So, yeah, I'm as you say, I'm a project manager. I have been for over a decade. I've worked in a number of businesses. I started in technology, as many project managers do, and I soon worked out that that wasn't quite the right fit for me. I was much more comfortable dealing with the operation side of things, and indeed with HR. In kind of various aspects of the projects. So I pivoted a little bit as I went on and through a couple of businesses, and I then decided to set up my own business in 2014. So we were in an interesting position as a family. My wife and I were both working full time, and we looked at I guess this was the first time I used my project management background in a family situation. So we looked at the timing, we looked at the money that we had, and the level of risk it would have taken to have started a business. So at that point, my wife's salary covered our bills. So we were in a position where I effectively had 6 months to grab a contract and kind of make my way in that world. Whereas if we'd waited 6 months until she had the baby, then it wouldn't have been possible, or it would have been a much higher risk, at least, in order to do so. So yes, I resigned almost immediately, and 3 months later, after a bit of nerves, found my first job, found as a contractor, which it was quiet for a while, but very nervy. But I started the role on the Monday after leaving permanent work on the Friday, and went from there. So, yeah.
Did you consider that to be a big risk? I mean, it's lots of people will stop from. I mean, we're going to talk about being internal HR as well in this context, but thinking about people making that first leap into independent HR consulting, for example, often that whole fear factor holds them back. And that sounds quite a scary leap. Did you see it? Would you consider yourself to be a risk taker? Or what had gone on in your head to mean that it wasn't a risk? And how was it that you knew you wanted to do that?
Well, it's a great point, and I think that I'm not a risk taker by default. I enjoy change. You know, I'm a natural consultant, if you like. You know, I worked at Capgemini earlier in my career, and you know, I was that was very much a consulting environment, going to clients that kind of weren't chosen by me, but it was regular moving around and working in different teams. So that side of thing wasn't a risk for me because I knew I'd done it before. Just this time I had to find my own clients, and we looked at the structure, and I guess, you know, it was we looked at our numbers, what we enjoyed doing, how we could do that, you know, whether it would have been the right thing for my wife to go back to work full time after the baby was born, and you know, and our skills, and my skills specifically in that decision in terms of what I could offer and to whom. You know, I was living in London. I still am, but I was living in London at the time, and you know, I wasn't working in London. My clients have been in Woking, in Leeds, in Peterborough, you know, and I was thinking, okay, well, when the baby's here, you know, I wouldn't have that level of control necessarily, you know, if I was being kind of made to go to such a client. So but yeah, I say we looked at the sums, and it's like, okay, I think I've got something to offer. You know, I reviewed the job boards and things, and looked at a number of roles that were available, and the type of skills that were required, and the level of experience, and really worked through that to firstly gain confidence that I could do it, but then also to mitigate the risk. So to consider all those factors that made it go, okay, well, that could be a problem, but we've got money for 6 months. That could be a problem, but the timing's okay, and there's not, you know, a brand new baby crying in the house while I'm trying to, you know, work with a new client. All of those things we kind of work through, and to make it make sense. And you know, as I've gone on over the years as an independent, and indeed writing the book, it's that structure that I've looked to apply, and I think the confidence that can come from that is by evaluating the situation, and that's where I've always looked to understand what the risk is, rather than, you know, just necessarily saying, oh, it's too big a risk. You know, I bumped into an old manager a few years later, a client who was there for a pitch, and explained, you know, that I'd left my job whilst my wife was pregnant, and he essentially said, oh, big risk, but it wasn't. When we broke it down into those individual steps, each of them made sense.
So actually, what I would really like to explore, I like the fact you've got this process when you were looking at the job boards, for example. And if we take that point of confidence, and you know, I'm going to be sexist here, but there is evidence for that. You know, you're a guy, and you looked at a job, and you followed a process, and it found it quite objective, and thought, well, that's not a problem. You sound like you rationalized each thing, and therefore we can go forward. You know that there's some evidence to say that women will look at certain jobs, and they'll look at the criteria, and they'll go down and they'll decide they haven't got the ability, the confidence. Is there something there that you could spell out that approach? It just sounds like it was quite a non-emotional, objective approach. Maybe it wasn't even personalized about you. What is it you need to do if you're looking at a job role to think objectively and have confidence to go for it, or not, but to be sure that you're not holding yourself back due to confidence?
Yeah, I think with the confidence side of things, I think quite often, you know, if someone's willing to offer you, whether it be a new role or a new responsibility within a current role, they must believe you can do it, and that you can deliver. And you know, every time we go into something new, it's by default something that we've not done before. And I think that, you know, constant small changes and small small steps, improvements is what really helps us to grow more than, you know, any kind of radical shift. And quite often, I say, these things can be broken down. But I you know, very early on in the structure, I bring in the self-evaluation, you know, looking at the experience that you've had before, applying how that experience would apply, and what you can take from that to take into the new position. Where did somebody offer you an opportunity that you may or may not have taken, but where there was an opportunity there to do something different or new that by default they believed you could do. So I think looking at those examples, whether they be in work or or in a leisure environment, I think all of those things are the confidence comes from small steps and from really reviewing what you've achieved. And it's so easy to move on and to it's like when I was in technology, especially, that you'd complete a project, next day you'd move on to the next one, and there's every now and again you might get some drinks organized to say well done by the management, but otherwise it's like next. But we don't look at our achievements. I think people don't necessarily reflect on how much we've grown. And if you are to take a step back and look 3 years in the past, 5 years in the past, and see where you are now, and so often there's a huge amount that's kind of achieved there that doesn't necessarily get the right level of reflection that can help to build confidence moving forwards.
So it is about being objective about your achievements as opposed to self-critical a bit. And so I suppose I'm thinking, so if you're an HR generalist or an independent and someone has said, well, could you do a strategy for our department? Then but you don't feel you're strategic, or there's a job that says, oh, I can't be strategic. Actually identify the fact they've offered that to you, therefore they think you can do it. So see that as a mark of confidence. Now you might need to get some support or some development, but it's have the confidence that someone believes in you, and therefore it's think yourself up rather than think yourself down, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think if they've asked you to do it, but they know you haven't done it before, then they're not going to expect you to be perfect first time as well. There is that, there's that understanding that things do take time, and we are asking somebody to do something they haven't done before. So all of that really helps to build into into the background. And I think especially at the moment with the situation, there's a huge amount of opportunities and changes in businesses. There's so much variability and instability, I guess, at the moment across so many businesses, that people are even the best HR teams aren't able to recruit for every single skill set or everything that they may need. So within the department as well as outside. So there's going to be lots of problems that need to be solved and things that need to be delivered. So that opportunity is there to kind of to step up and say, okay, or to have a go. You won't always succeed, but to have a go and try and help drive things forwards. And I think that's especially key if it's in an area that you're interested in.
Well, that's you're going to be happier in that area, aren't you? And going back to your point about that, I think that's a really interesting point at the moment, because maybe some of the lack of confidence that people are experiencing is down to the fact that we're in unprecedented times, aren't we? We're in a time when no one really knows the answers to this. I mean, I feel with our business, sometimes it's like, well, could someone just come and tell me what the magic answers are? But there might be people who have the magic answer from 5 years ago, but it wasn't in COVID times. It wasn't in the times where technology is right now, where we've got hybrid workforces. Everything has changed. So we're all really making it up to a certain extent, aren't we? So it's about how can we, again, well, I guess your processes, be sure that we're not just shooting from the hip, that we are applying some sort of structured thinking which minimizes the risk of doing the wrong thing. But no one really knows what the right answer is in these circumstances, because because the environment is so volatile and things change so quickly.
Absolutely. And I've worked in in M&A over the last few years, and in that environment there's a huge amount of change in a short period of time. And I think every business in many respects is going through that kind of volatility at the moment. And people look to HR, the other departments look to HR and expects them to kind of fix things else, but who looks after HR? It's like and that's
exactly.
that's the challenge there.
very much at the moment, and they're expected to be experts in laws that change literally overnight as we're recording this. And I think we're recording this on the 3rd of November, and furlough was extended on Saturday all of a sudden. So HR people had a lovely Monday. So yeah, you're expected to be experts in things when a landscape is changing with no warning, which is tricky. So going back to structure, if you were to walk through a structure for just thinking things through, you started with sort of saying, actually, what are my skills? What are my achievements? What do I know about myself already? What else could I do to sort of think to feel sure that I am following something which is logical and I'm minimizing risks?
Well, the key structure in the book is the future methods, which is to find something that you think might be appropriate, to then understand why, and then to trial it. And so, at the end of those three, so the trial would be something short and low risk, effectively a pilot, if you like. So at the end of those three steps is where you would make a decision as to what to do next. And then in the next phase, it's to undertake, so to do whatever you've decided to do, and then to review it. So it's constantly back and forth on a weekly or monthly basis, whatever it may be, to undertake and review. And once you get to the end of at the end of a deadline, whenever that may be, or you reach a goal or a milestone, you would expand into the next step. So they are the 6 steps that make up the future method.
Do you want to go through them again from the top, and maybe let's try and come up with an example with them?
Find, understand, trial, undertake, review, expand. They're the 6 steps.
So in that structure, you've got 2 points of review, basically, haven't you? Trial, and then review. So what you're really saying is you're not expecting to be right first time.
Absolutely.
You're actually expecting it to be okay for it to be wrong to start with, but you're setting out with that expectation that you're going to have to refine it. And I'm thinking that's quite linked to things like evidence-based practice, which they talk about there. Is you have a hypothesis, let's say, and you try that hypothesis, and then you need to review it, and you're likely to have to expand it or even drop it. The only challenge, I suppose, is with something like going for a new job. You've got to go for it all in. What happens if you get it and it's wrong, or if you've changed? How did you, before you decided to jump, because you're going, oh, it's the wrong thing, I'm going to go back into my job. You've kind of made your bed by then, haven't you? Is there something that takes place earlier?
Yeah, you've made your bed, but you can always go back as well. Nothing's ever final. But yes, there is something that happens earlier, which is to look through the mindset, your mindset, and your openness to change. How tenacious you're likely to be, what you enjoy. And then to look into the factors to consider. In terms of what the new job will entail. So one of the key ones, certainly for us in my family, is the impact factor, which is if you take a new job or if you start a business, what will the impacts be on your family, on your partner and your kids, your elderly relatives you may have to look after, all of those things, and are they up for it effectively? Are they going to support you and be on side, or will it be too much of a challenge? It's the lack of your availability if you're going to be too busy or working away, per my example earlier. All of those things come into it in terms of looking at to take a step before making the decision. But I think when it comes to a new job, specifically on that point, where in the find step, you would have a number of options before deciding to go forward. So if you're in HR, for example, it's partly it's what you enjoy doing, what you're good at. But you can take all those aspects of HR, so recruitment, L&D, employee relations, all of those things. And if you have come from a generalist background, or indeed are stepping up, is that the right path to go down? And all of those, so I don't know how many functions, 8 to 10 potential roles potentially could be considered, at a high level, and you may rule out 1 or 2 of them straight away, literally in 5 minutes. It's like, no, I'm not interested in L&D, or I'm not interested in recruitment. It's whatever that may be. But then that helps to filter through, so that by the time you get to the interview process, not only hopefully are you confident it's the right thing for you, but you can then go to speak confidently to the manager and the hiring manager, and have them believe that yes, you are the right person for the job, because you've done the thinking, you've thought it through, and you've shown that you'll enjoy it, which is important to people, and that you've got the willingness to learn and to succeed.
I think that's an interesting point, actually, because HR is an easy title, isn't it? But it actually encompasses a real wide range of activities. And what interesting is the standalone HR is quite different. You've got to have a lot of hats on, but often you end up doing quite a lot of the I suppose structural, transactional stuff as well, in terms of managing things, unless you're lucky enough to have someone, someone to do your admin type roles. But then in a larger organization, you might have, as you mentioned, you might have learning and development, you might have employee relations, you might have reward people, you might have recruitment. And my perception is that as you know, my background is learning and development, and I actually think I would not have been very good in some aspects of HR because I'm not process enough driven. And I remember a really good friend of mine who's an HR mate. She was we did a personality tool years and years ago, and I kind of expected her to be people oriented, but no, actually her main driver was process, and that was really, really important because she had to dot the I's and cross the T's, whereas I was much more sort of people got change oriented because I was a trainer, and that was about being able to make decisions on my feet. So we wouldn't really have swapped jobs happily. We would have been competent, but maybe not happy in those roles. And there is something there about finding the right fit for you within the profession that you choose. And so having that reflection, as you said earlier, is like, where would you have strengths? I mean, it's also good if someone does give you the opportunity to try something, you go, I've tried that. I've tried running training courses. It's not for me. Or, it's good to have those experiences. But maybe knowing which elements, I think there's a personality element as to which bits of HR that you find that you enjoy the most. And maybe that's why many people feel that they haven't got the confidence, because they're having to wear so many hats, which won't naturally all be a good fit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and the size of the business does have an impact there due to the variety. I've worked in tiny businesses and in very large ones over the years, and I think the larger the business, the more opportunity there is to specialize, certainly. Yes. But at the same time, it's having that visibility of what all the options are and taking the right one forwards. I think there's some fantastic personality tests out there. I've taken I think most of them over the years, but it's very early on in my career during university I did a work placement year, industrial placement, and during the assessment center for that we were given Belbin team roles to do within the kind of full day assessment center, and that's my first visibility of anything like that. And I came out as a shaper, and a project manager is a natural role for a shaper. And
so just to explain for listeners who don't know Belbin what that means you are good at.
It means that I'm good at pulling the strings effectively and working with specialists, so people that are many of the other roles effectively that you would need within a team, within a project. So
you'd be kind of a driver lead role, wouldn't you, in it as well, and give a sense of urgency to it and focus on the deadlines and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's noted, being aware of people's key competencies, and indeed the opposite, and helping to drive them forwards and help the team deliver. So a shaper, it's almost the conductor of the orchestra, if you like, in many respects. And I ignored that for a few years. That test, and it was only in my mid-20s after university that I struggled for a couple of years to find the right path for me. And I took some time out. I spoke to some recruitment people, and I looked at it, and and I took a step back at that and thought, okay, that was for a reason. That I'm my mentality is that. So it's like, okay, what are some roles that come from the shaper side of things? So yeah, I think using the experiences that you've had, and then looking at what you enjoy doing, and hopefully there aren't a huge amount of pluses from 2020, but one of them from that volatility is the ability to gain new experiences and to solve problems and to help to shape the future direction of your career.
That is a really valid point. I think there is about reflecting on what people have learnt anyway. So we've all, I defy anybody not to have learnt stuff over the last 6 months. You might not realize that, so adapting in a volatile environment, learning how to use technology, we're all having, if we're surviving, we're learning. That's why people are probably a bit tired in some ways, because we might also be having to do things that we're not naturally good at, it can be tiring. But maybe recognize, again, often as you're going through stuff, you don't realize how far you've come. So it feels like this would be a really good time for people to go, actually, take stock. What have I done and where do I want to go from here? In terms of this. And obviously there are people out there who are looking for their next job. There are people who have lost their roles. So, what would be my ideal next role? I think that also can help people get, if you have real clarity about what you're good at, and you can give examples of that, positively thinking that's going to help you when you go forward for your next role. So rather than going for every role, be really quite clear on the ones that are going to help you the most.
100%, and certainly, I think, it's one of the things I talk about very early on in the book, is that, in that time, a couple of years after university, when I was lost, I turned up with one recruitment agency with 5 CVs. One in HR, actually, one in finance, one in marketing. It was like pretty much pick a business discipline, and I can do it. I'm willing to learn, all this kind of thing. And you should have seen the look on their face. It was like, just go away.
I don't think you're supposed to show them you've got 5 CVs.
No, I know. Well, this was an agency, so
I see.
It was an agency, not for a specific role. But it was like, go away and think clearly about what you want to do, and that was such great advice. And I think so many of the changes that have happened this year and will continue over the next couple of years have been brought forwards. I think technology was kind of going to create a huge amount of change in this decade anyway, but so many things have now been brought forwards radically, and having being clear on what you want to do will help convince somebody to say yes. I think whether that is as an independent or as an employee, I think showing that you're the right person and the reasons why is going to be absolutely key to make you stand out as an individual.
Yeah, and so if you were thinking about that, how you might set that, if you've got if you've got someone who's a tired, overworked HR professional who's thinking, what am I going to do next, whether it's setting up on their own or my future career, have you got, what would you recommend people's thought process right now if they want to just take stock, they are where they are? What's a positive thinking process for them?
I think if they look at what they enjoy doing, what they're good at, and where they want to be in 3 to 5 years' time, I think it's like it's easy to overcook what you can achieve in a year, but sometimes people don't think clearly enough, about where they can be in 3 to 5 years. So it's having those longer term goals and working out what the short term objectives are to get there, whether that's a qualification, whether it's some experience, whether it's working on a different project or different aspects of their role, and just having those regular reviews. So every 3 months, say, taking a checkpoint, putting something in the calendar to say, okay, how did I get on with that? Was it what I expected it to be? All of the stuff that goes into trial, I should say, and review.
It's almost be your own career buddy, or get someone to do it with you.
Yeah, absolutely, and get a buddy as well. I think they don't need to. I have a buddy that I speak with every Monday. So we speak. He's in a different business to me completely. He's a techie. But we speak every Monday about our plans, what we achieved last week compared to what we plan to achieve, and indeed the longer term goals. But
good for you, accountability buddy. Wow, that's.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as an independent, it can be lonely at times, so it's just having that in the diary. And if it gets to Friday afternoon and I've got a load of stuff left on my list that isn't done, then I know I'm going to have to tell someone about it.
Yeah.
So it just helps to drive things forwards. But I think really getting some clarity on, otherwise it's so easy to drift, or it's so easy to be offered a promotion or a different role that might not be the right one for you. As you mentioned your example earlier on, in terms of the different aspects, it's they're not all right for an individual, and I think having some clarity on where you'd like to get to, and taking small steps towards it, and then say review and see if it might not have been what you expected it to be, but if you've taken a small step towards it, then it's easy to step back or to sidestep into something else.
I think that's really quite inspiring, because it's easy for people to feel worn down. So even if you feel that we are stuck at the moment, we can still take a little bit of stock, think, okay, and that's a good adage that I've read that a couple of times, about the fact that often we overestimate what we can achieve in a year, but underestimate what we can achieve in 3 to 5 years. So just think a little bit, dream a little bit, where might you like to be in 3 to 5 years? Then it's like, break it down, think about what can I do now that takes me just slightly towards that goal, even if it's read a book or listen to a podcast or set up a buddy. Just to have that sense of achievement, but also in a time where we don't have an awful lot of control. We're going into lockdown again, so people feel out of control. That's quite hard. So you're also giving yourself a sense that you're actually taking control of your destiny. So I think it's quite good for our mental health as well, feeling that we're going somewhere productive, that we want to go, rather than drifting, as you say.
Well, that's it. We all need something to look forward to. It's and I say it's hard at the moment. It's like as an individual, I always like to have a holiday booked, even if it's a little weekend away. I always like to have a running event booked, and I can't do either of those at the moment. And I haven't done all year, and it's really odd for me to, I'm someone that needs to get motivated to train. I need to have a target, which is why I like to have a 10K or a half marathon or something booked, so I'm working towards that goal and that deadline. And yeah, absolutely, I think it's everybody is in such unprecedented times that it's hard to cope, and it's hard to see some light.
Gosh, okay, so that's great in terms of where people are in the workplace. And I suppose, how have you applied this to your own future and your own business, and worked out what you're going to do? Have you applied your same methodology that way?
I have. So I've written the book, and as we say, that comes out 5th of January, and I've applied that to create a range of outplacement redundancy services.
Okay.
So I've looked at everything that I've done in M&A and elsewhere, and seen that a lot of people now, especially, are going to be in a position where they don't know what to do next, and the natural position to maybe work in a similar role or for an employer or for a competitor isn't going to be available, because they're in the same position as many businesses are. So there's the opportunity to consider starting a business, and evaluating that process. So my redundancy outplacement services are in 3 layers, depending on the level of seniority of the member of staff, and I work with HR teams to offer those services for those members of their team that are interested in starting a business.
So specifically for people who want to set up on their own rather than start a new job, then go into okay, so it's quite a niche offering. Okay.
It is. Starting a business isn't for everybody, but I strongly believe that outplacement is the right time and medium in order to look and consider the option, because there is that time, there's potential, that funding that could be used as startup capital as well. So that kind of environment, and it's something that an HR team can do to help somebody on their way. So redundancy is not nice for anybody, but I think the specialism that comes from that I offer helps people really push forwards and make the right decision for their future.
What's really interesting about you offering that there is interesting, going to the whole knowing your niche, and again, not overgeneralizing, the thing about 5 CVs. So that's very clear, and that's not even just redundancy outplacement where you can be competing with all the big ones. It's actually, if people want to do something where they want to be an independent in some way, whether it's growing a business or just being a freelancer, it's quite specific. And one of the things I found when I set up on my own years ago, before I started the business, was I was quite a generalist trainer, so I could do most things. The problem with that, if you're very generalist, even though you might be capable of doing most things, no one knows what to buy you for. So it's quite useful to get that clarity about what is your niche going to be. Whether you then expand because you've got relationships with businesses, that's different. But that's a really, really clear niche. So I can see you're walking your talk there. Rob, it's really great. Thank you very much. So your book, the book's called Project Future. It'll be out on the 5th on Amazon, I'm assuming on the 5th of January.
Yep, all good booksellers. It's available from all good booksellers. Hopefully
we'll be out of lockdown. I launched a book during lockdown. That's not so good for booksellers. But in terms of that, so how, if people would like to connect with you prior to that, how do they get hold of you?
You can drop me an email on rob@robkerr.co.uk, or indeed the website is robkerr.co.uk. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I value my LinkedIn highly, so it's /Rob Kerr author. Or you can join my Facebook group, which is the Project Future Club.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much for coming on the HR Uprising podcast, Rob. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Lucinda. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising, proudly brought to you by Actus Software, the joined-up performance and talent management solution. You can access links to any of the information or resources mentioned in the show via the podcast page at www.hruprising.com. If you like what we do, please subscribe, tell your colleagues, and leave a review. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising.